So in the introduction part, I just want to focus on 2 points that is more important to understand what is critical and dialectical thinking and why there is need to develop a new test to measure these two thinking styles. So according to the literature, critical thinking is more like a scientific kind of thinking, and dialectical thinking is a philosophical argument that is used in a contradictory information. Previous literature suggests that a critical thinker focuses on the problem, but dialectical thinker also focus on the surrounding context in addition to the problem. The critical thinker look for the direct causes of the problem, but dialectical thinker also look for the indirect causes of the problem. For a critical thinker, when there is a contradictory situations, they look for the option that is more related to the scenario, but a dialectical thinker in contradictory situation try to synthesize different information and look for the middle ground. For critical thinkers, they believe that things will remain stable over time, but dialectical thinkers believe that nothing is stable and reality is constantly changing. So in literature, there are two main points that is need to understand, that is culture perspectives, so culture studies perspectives, and recent studies meta thinking perspective on these two thinking styles. According to the culture study, there is a very famous person, Nisbet, in 2003. He explained in his book, The Geography of Thought, he suggested that Westerns are more critical thinkers and Asians are more dialectical thinkers. But recent meta-thinking studies suggest that actually critical and dialectical are two higher order form of thinking, and if a person is a higher order thinker, then they are mostly meta thinker. So it's mean that when there is a situation, they try to analyze the situation and they look whether the situation is demanding their critical ability or dialectical ability, or maybe the combination of both types. So here also the educational psychologist view is important to understand. On the one side, they also agree with the meta thinking studies. They suggest that actually higher educational institute purpose is to teach both critical and dialectical thinking, which is true because one is logical thinking, other is dealing with philosophical arguments. But same time, some educators also claim that Asian students have lack critical thinkings, and because of their low ability, they are struggling in the European university. So if we look into the literature, so we found the dichotomy in these two different perspectives. So current study make a aim to re-examine the role of culture, the individualistic and collectivistic culture, on critical and dialectical thinking. In addition to the role of culture, current study also interested in to find out the role of gender, because there is generally lack of this study on this topic. So I decided to collect the data from the Higher Educational Institute. So next step was that how to measure these two thinking skills. So I need some test. So when I look into the literature, then I found some limitation in already available tests. So first limitation is that literature itself claimed that the critical thinking instruments become big business and there is no standardized test available free of cost. The second thing is that critical instruments are highly academic and like mathematical and statistical in nature, and they are not adequately replicate the kind of academic task. Number 3 limitation is that if we compare the dialectical scale with critical scale, so one side is highly subjective instruments and the other is highly objective instruments. So if you subjective means your own emotions and feelings including, and in objective these emotion and feelings is already ruled out. So I was looking an instrument that can measure both thinking styles simultaneously and objectively. In literature, I already found 3 instruments that claim to measure both thinking styles simultaneously. For example, analytical holism and holistic cognition scale. So in above 2 instruments, you can see there is a statement, and if you are highly on a strongly agree side, then you are a dialectical thinker. You have a dialectical thinker tendency. If you are more strongly disagree side, you have a critical thinker. So that is, if we see to the triad task, which is also known as an image test. So if someone categorized the fork with the knife, then that is the abstract category. So it's mean the person is more analytical or critical thinker. And if a person matched the fork with the cakes, and that is the functional relationship, so that it's mean the person have more holistic thinking tendency. So again, here I found some limitation in these instruments, because one thing is that these instruments measure the tendency, not the skills. And higher education purpose, institute purpose is to teach both skills. Tendency is something our inherited ability, and skill something learnable. And so I make a decision with experts that there is need to develop a new test. So that is the item format. For example, you can see that we decided that there would be a scenario or problem or situation, and then one critical solution, one dialectical solution, and one is the distractor would be there. So here is an example item. You don't need to read it. It is just to show you the one item example. So that is the scenario and 3 different options. So like this, 27 items develop, and these items measure interpretation and analytical skills, inference skill, explanation skills, self-regulation skill, evaluation skill. And in evaluation skill, actually no dialectical option is present, because according to the definition of evaluation skill, it is more like a mathematical kind of small calculation, so where no dialectical option can be possible, like no medium way, 1 + 1 is equal to 2, there is no other right or wrong answer could be, or there is no middle way to find the solution. And how I found these skills and why I selected, actually I follow this report, Dialectical report. This is also known as a Dialectical project. In this 1-year project, 46 expert group members work on this topic a lot, and they suggest that actually if a person is a higher order thinker, then they have all these skills, and they explain this in this project, in this report, all these skills with all definitions. So I follow this standardized procedure to conduct the development of the new test. For example, I discuss with the expert group, develop the item, I follow that Dialectical report already, which is also from the experts. So then I collect data for pilot study, final study, and I also work for the reliability and validity of the newly developed test. So data I collected from the individualistic culture, so German as an individualistic culture and Pakistan as a collectivistic culture. And data was collected 2 times, one time for the pilot study and second time for the final study. So if we look to the pilot study results, so item 1 to 5, so here I mentioned that evaluation skill item where minor mathematical and probability calculations was present. So people already struggle. So actually here we can see that when the previous literature was saying that when critical instruments are highly mathematical and statistical, then people already getting struggles. So here we can see that people already struggle to find the correct answer. They are more on distractor side, but yes, if we compare the cross-culture comparison on critical bar, so we can say the critical score is higher in German participant as compared to the Pakistani participant. If we look to the result from item 6 to 27, that is a Likert scale and for all 3 options. So here, if we look specifically the dialectical option, so we can see that actually in both culture people prefer this option more equally. There is no difference. So overall, the pilot study results suggest that if 1 to 5 item is multiple choice, other is Likert scale, and second thing is that Likert scale drawback is to that they are not giving telling you people preferences. So everybody is highly agree or maybe disagree for one option. So if we want to understand their preferences, so it is better to convert the Likert scale into the multiple choice method. So data was collected again with multiple choice method of the test, and here is the result. So first item number 1 to 5 where minor mathematical options was available, situations was available. Here the result is similar like a pilot study. People still struggle to find the correct answer, and but yes, the German participant score are higher. If we look item 6 to 27, so overall we can see that in both culture, people prefer the dialectical thinking over critical thinking, but overall score in German participant for both higher order thinking is higher, and Pakistan participant score are higher on distractor side. So if we look for the gender differences in both cultures, so result shows that there is no gender differences in Pakistan, and in German participants, female participants shows higher dialectical thinking as compared to their male counterpart. And then I also conduct a latent class analysis procedure to understand the reliability of the instrument and to understand the hidden variable in the data. So overall, the result of this latent class analysis suggests that this is a reliable instrument. I also conduct the validity process on this instrument, and I choose the process of convergent validity. Convergent validity means that to compare the newly developed test result with already available standardized tests. So in the final phase, when I was collecting data, so I also collect data on these 3 other instruments. So this result comparison shows, so here for example, the holistic and analytical holism scale both shows that German is high dialectical. Yes, we can see this from the red bar, and if we compare German and Pakistan, that's mean that German is highly dialectical scores. And the triad task also suggests that Germans are high critical score as compared to the Pakistan, and we can see that yes, it is true. But overall, if we look to the result, then the newly developed give a broader picture, and it tells how much ability one person is preferring one thinking style over other. And if we compare the result of this convergent validity on a gender topic, then we can also see that, for example, situational judgment newly developed tests also suggests that there is a gender difference significant in German, and that similar finding found by analytical holism scale, but not other 2. But in other side, the Pakistan culture side, all results are similar. So overall, these results shows that this newly developed test is valid and reliable instrument. So in the discussion part, the 2 most important points need to be considered. So whether it is justified to say that critical and dialectical is only a cultural product, one culture is have one thinking style and other have other thinking style, or it is more appropriate to say that that is a meta thinking subtypes. And then we will consider why there is a gender difference significant in German culture but not in Pakistan. So here, if we look to this graph again, then we can see we can see that both culture have both abilities, like critical and dialectical. Yes, they prefer dialectical more over critical, but it is not, we can't say that only Asians are dialectical and only Westerns are criticals. So we can, from this picture, already understand that is a meta thinking concept is more appropriate to describe. And if we look this picture here, then we can better understand the meta thinking studies. For example, this is the result from the 27 item in across culture. So consider, suppose these 27 items are 27 different situations. People in different situation, in one situation prefer to be a dialectical, in other situation prefer to be a critical, and so on. So in the first 5 items, you can't see the red color because there is a no dialectical option, as I already explained. So in the last, I want to explain why gender difference is significant in German but not in Pakistan. The previous literature also suggests that actually in individualistic culture, the gender difference merge more easily, because in collectivistic culture, people try to maintain their social relationship, and that's that their maintenance demands to be a similar thinking style irrespective of gender. And but that is so here we can see somehow the cultural influence in the gender topic. So yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you so much.
So welcome. So I'm glad that so many people are still here at the end of the conference. And I'm presenting today, but it's actually a talk by my previous doctoral student, Lisa Zacharski, who would have loved to be here, but couldn't make it, unfortunately, so I'm stepping in. And Annika Oldach, another person who works on this project, is here in the audience. So it's about gender for language in German. And I give a little bit of a background because maybe some people are not as familiar with German. So German is a gender language, as we call it. So we have articles, die, der, das, that assign gender to all the nouns. And so here are two examples. Der Radfahrer, so the cyclist on the left side is masculine. And on the right side, it's also a cyclist. In English, there is no difference. Oh, there's an error. The teacher is in here. So the cyclist, the female cyclist, is called the Radfahrerin, so in the singular. And in the plural, you also have different forms. So the masculine is Radfahrer, and the plural is Radfahrerinnen. So you have a marking on the noun if it refers to people, if it refers to persons, that actually explicitly indicates whether it's a woman or a man. So one problem, of course, is if you don't want to mark gender, so if you just talk about that the cyclists are supposed to dismount and they're not supposed to be in the pedestrian area, for instance, then you say Radfahrer absteigen. So you have this rule that in cases where you don't know what the gender of the people is that you're talking about, or if it's not relevant, you use the masculine. So that is the default use that is usual in German, and in many other gendered languages that's the same thing. And so the question, of course, is does that then induce so-called male bias? So the traffic sign is supposed to refer to all cyclists, so it's a generic or gender overarching use, and the question is the use of these generic masculines a sign for some male bias in the language? And there are lots of studies that I'm not going to talk about today that show, yes, that's the case. So you have an association, so you have a picture in your mind. If you talk about male professors, so die Professoren, for instance, that you actually imagine more men than women. And the idea that actually started in the 70s already of last century is to change the language a bit and to make women more explicit. And these were so-called binary gender forms, and they increase the visibility of women. And so what do these binary forms look like? You just use both. So if you don't know whether you're talking about female or male teachers, for instance, you can say Lehrerin und Lehrer, male teacher and female teacher, or there were also some abbreviations for these forms, and one of them is the so-called capital I form, where you indicate with this capital I in the middle of the word that this is an abbreviated pair form. And this is actually something that is not orthographical, that was just suggested by feminist linguists in the 70s, and it actually has been used quite a bit throughout several decades. One criticism of this usage is, and this pie here is supposed to indicate binary genders, blue and red, and there is a lot in between. So the criticism that came up in the last maybe 30 years or 20, I don't know exactly, is that these pair forms and these abbreviated pair forms are actually binary, and so they do not take into account that we have all different kinds of variable gender identities, and we have diverse people that do not identify necessarily with one or the other gender, but there is actually a wide spectrum. And to account for that, non-binary gender-inclusive alternatives have been suggested, and they are in use, depending on where you look. So in some newspapers, in academic settings, and so on. And that is the so-called asterisk form, so where you have this Lehrer, which is the masculine stem, and you have Lehrerin, as I said before, and in between the suffix in that indicates female, usually you just put an asterisk in there, and the asterisk is a symbol that is supposed to stand for a whole variety, a very wide spectrum of identities. And also the second word, LehrerInnen, in the plural works in the same way. So you have this non-binary gender-inclusive alternative. And so that's fine, so we could just use that. And there's also evidence by now, so this is one of our own studies here, that this gender star or gender asterisk actually works, so that it actually indeed influences the mental representations that people have. And so some ideas, some criticists say that, well, it's just read as if it was a feminine form. This asterisk is just ignored, and so people just think it's all women. But with a picture matching task we showed a couple of years ago that it's actually a pretty good way of including people of different genders. In order to elicit this proper mental representation, we can use these forms. But another important issue here is, of course, whether these forms that are not orthographically valid are actually readable, so, or whether they are kind of confusing people. So if you read a text and you get this asterisk, and maybe some people don't even know what it's supposed to mean, or others say, well, I don't care about this activism and this queer stuff, and I just want to have my normal language, then the question is, of course, is there an impairment in readability? And so some people say that the gender star is not in line with German orthography, and its use makes role nouns and text harder to read and understand. And there's also some political debate going on about this. Of course, many of you who live here in Germany have been exposed to that. That is actually a very emotional issue on top of whether it's the correct form to include people. And so here are a few of these examples. So we have gender verbote. So Söder is one of the outspoken opponents, so the Minister President of Bavaria. And so there's a lot of discussion going on. But this question of whether the readability is indeed impaired has not really been studied much. So everyone says there's also this research on gender fair language, but it's actually not the case when you really look at the literature. So experimental research is still rare. And so we want to ask in this study whether the gender star influences the readability of texts. And of course, it's not quite true that there is no research, and I just want to mention a few studies very briefly. And there are some studies on the binary form, so this capital I form that I introduced earlier. And there are some studies that show that with explicit measures, so having people rate whether the texts are easy to read or difficult to read, there is a little bit of an impairment. So people rate the text with a capital I a little less readable. And there's one study with implicit measures, namely reading times, that also shows that if you have a combination of neutral forms and capital I forms, the reading times slow down a bit. So, yeah, that's a little bit of an evidence that there might be something to it. For the non-binary gender star, there's not that much research because it has been introduced relatively recently, and research has to pick up on that. And there are studies, for instance, by Friedrich and colleagues, who has done quite a few studies on that, where also the subjects were asked to explicitly rate the comprehensibility and readability and word difficulty, for instance, of texts, and they found no differences in these subjective comprehensibility ratings, at least as long as you don't have these really complex noun phrases like die, asterisk, der, rote, asterisk, are, Radfahrer, or so on. So because in German the articles and the adjectives have to agree with the grammatical gender of the noun, and so you get relatively complicated noun phrases. If you use those, it's kind of a different issue, but if you don't use them, if you use the asterisk mostly in the plural, it's actually not a big issue. And with implicit measures, it's also a study that we did in our project. It was done with a lexical decision task on the word level. There was no difficulty in word recognition for words with the gender asterisk, at least for younger people and students, and for an older sample, so non-students that were a little bit older, so not old people, but 30 years and older. There was an initial increase in reaction times, but that was very quickly remedied. So because people got used to these forms, and then it wasn't a problem anymore. So there are studies on the text level and on the word level, but the ones on the text level are all on explicit ratings of people. And what we want to do now is to investigate the readability on the text level, and with eye tracking, so that it's an implicit measure that we just look at the natural reading of people. And we embedded the gender-fair words in a text context and used self-paced natural reading. And we also wanted to see whether the repeated exposure makes a difference. So if people read the first star word, they might get a little bit confused, but then after the second or third occurrence of the same word, they get used to it and they learn it. And we also wanted to compare the readability of the gender star to a different non-orthographic forms, namely the capital I, which I introduced earlier, because the capital I has been around for much longer, and it's thereby known to older readers, and it reflects a feminization strategy. And in terms of attitudes, a lot of people actually are feminists, and they say that's perfectly fine to talk more about women, but they don't want to get in all this queer discussion and non-binarity and so on. And so it could also be that that makes a difference. And the gender star, in contrast, is relatively recent, is more familiar to younger readers, and reflects non-binary strategies. So the eye tracker looks like this. So the setup was an eye tracker. I think all of you have seen this before. So the person reads the text on the computer screen and has the head here resting on it on this chin rest, and the camera records the eye movements during that time. So what kind of texts did we use? So we used kind of newspaper stories, so they were made up, so they were fake newspaper stories, and so I guess you cannot really read it, and it's also not that important. It's just regular stuff about, I don't know, some political discussions or about sports or whatever. And the interesting thing is here that we no, oh, I have the wrong button here. Here, so this is the target word, EinwohnerInnen, and that occurs 4 times in the text. That is in all the text. This one is here, the capital I form. The same text appears in other lists for other people in the star form or in the masculine form. And what we also did, which is quite nice, I guess, is that we used these logos on top that actually give a fake newspaper or a fake magazine or something to make it more plausible for the subjects that some articles are with the gender-fair forms and others are in the masculine, because that is actually our natural, normal reading experience as well. And so people read these texts. And so the methods are like this. We had 32 of these newspaper articles on different topics: biology, politics, local news, sports, and so on. And each had a specific logo. There are more examples here on the right side. And that was supposed to distract participants from the fact that different gender forms are being used and make it more ecologically valid. And 24 of these newspaper articles were experimental texts. And in each of the experimental texts, 4 tokens of the same role noun in the same gender form were used. So we did not switch within a text between different forms. And we used stereotypically neutral role nouns only, so no nurses, no car mechanics, but only inhabitants, for instance, that are not gendered in terms of the semantic meaning, because we just wanted to see what the word form does. And we had 3 conditions, 3 gender form variants: the gender star, the capital I, and the masculine. And so this is again the example that we had before. I don't need to show that. I think I said all of this. And so we had these 2 independent variables, the gender form and the number of occurrence in the text from 1 to 4. Then there were 8 filler texts with non-inflected role nouns, and that was just to break it up a little bit and make it less obvious what the topic was. So it was a 3x4 within subjects design, gender form, gender star capital I in masculine, and occurrence number 1 to 4. I just said that. The participants were 49 students of cognitive science, so this is the first study that we did with a student sample, and there were regular students, so around 22 years of age, and we actually took some trouble to find female and male students because we have more female students in our courses. And the eye tracking, I don't really need to say much about that. So we had a calibration of the eye tracker in the beginning so that all the measurements are accurate. And then there was one practice trial to get people used to the procedure. And the 32 trials, they read the newspaper article. And then afterwards, they responded to a comprehension question. There was a multiple choice question to make sure that they actually read for content and actually did the reading task properly. And after that, we had a couple of questionnaires, and one questionnaire was about the actual gender forms in these target words. So people were supposed to recall which of the role nouns they actually recalled in a recognition task. And a second questionnaire was on attitudes towards gender-fair language, in particular to non-binary and binary in separate items, and also demographic information on gender and age and things like that. We tracked the eye movements during reading, and there are lots of different variables that you can analyze, and I think most of you are familiar with eye tracking as a procedure, and I just want to talk about one of them, namely first pass reading times, and that is you read along, so viele Einwohnerinnen nicht mehr are the words, so each word is a region of interest, and you can see the circles here are the fixations of a particular person, and first pass reading times is defined as the sum of all these fixations when you first read through this word. And because with eye tracking you can also map regressions, so when you actually look back and reread something, but this is just the first time, and so the first pass reading times in this case would be the sum of the fixations 2, 3, and 4. And what did we find with this measure? This is first just the descriptive results, and you can see that there is quite a bit of distribution as always, but if you look on the right side, there are the means of the reading times, and that is on the target word, so Einwohner, Einwohnerinnen, and you can see that for the masculine, the reading times are 315 milliseconds. For the asterisk and capital I, they are longer with 390 and 380 milliseconds approximately. So that would, at first glance, actually confirm that the gender-fair forms are more difficult than the masculine. So if we don't control for any other factors that have been shown to be important in reading, namely word length, or word frequency, the reading times were fastest for the masculine nouns. But when we want to see what happened to the asterisk, it's actually a little shorter even, although it's a little bit longer, because the asterisk compared to the capital I, there's only the I and there's one character more, but the reading times are actually quite similar. So that is, kind of, we don't know yet what to do about this. But, of course, the analysis, as I said, does not take into account all these other really important factors. And so we did a second analysis in which we used a so-called baseline model on all the words in the text, not just these 4 Einwohners, but all the words in the text. And here we controlled, and this is the equation for the mixed model, you don't need to read this, we controlled the word length and where in the text the word appeared, whether it was in the first line or whether on the line it was in the beginning or at the end, or whether it was in the title or in the body of the text and so on. So all these factors of no interest were controlled in this, or were put into this model. And then we used for the actual main analysis the residuals of this first analysis. So we factored out all this other stuff and looked at the predictions and the residuals. And that model then was very simple. So we just looked at the two independent variables, gender, form, and occurrence number. And word frequency? I thought that was in the other one, but okay. And so here the results then are very surprising. So because if we look at these residuals, we find not that the masculine is the fastest, but on the contrary, the asterisk is actually the fastest condition. And so this is really surprising. We didn't really think that would happen at all. We thought that we would find the same reading times for all of them. But here we have these first pass reading times are significantly faster for the role nouns in the gender star form. And there was also an effect of the occurrence number. So over the course of the text, the reading times became faster, but that's also a result that has been known for a long time, that you speed up during the course of the text because you have repetition effects. And this is the result for the students, and for the first pass reading times, and this is a very short sneak preview, but I don't have time anymore. So this is the numbers of fixations, because we were interested in whether people would actually fixate twice on the words with the asterisk, or more often because they just fixate on the suffix and the asterisk, for instance, and that seems to be the case. So the asterisk again is here fixated more often. And so the conclusions are that the gender star form did not impede the readability of the text in the early reading stages, in the first pass reading times, and in contrast, it seems to make them even easier to read initially. And the hypothesis is that the asterisk is really salient, and so people actually look at it, and they also don't need to really think about whether it's women or men, and so that it has a kind of a signal function. And preliminary analysis show higher total fixation counts, and we're getting into that in further analysis. And another study that Annika is running just now is that the weird sample, so the student sample that we had in the first study, needs to be extended by a group of people that are more diverse, in particular in terms of age, and the data collection is now in progress. And with that, I thank the members of the research group of the DFG project that we just finished now, actually. So this picture is taken in Mainz just on Sunday because the project is ended now. And I also thank some collaborators at the University of Freiburg. And so I think we have a few time for a few questions.
So my name is Asya Achimova. This is the final talk in this poster session, and there will be one final keynote talk after that. I would like to share our work on indirect communication today with you and focus on its intercultural dimension. And this work has been led by Paulina Messner. This was her bachelor's thesis, and also in collaboration with Martin Butz and Dirk Wildgruber, who is in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Tübingen. In this work, we are thinking about verbal communication. So a very common view of what we try to do when we speak to each other is that we want to transmit information, right? So we want to tell each other about things, and then the best thing that we can do is find the most efficient way to package this information, right? So when, as speakers, we are supposed to find an optimal way to send our message so that it can be easily understood by our interlocutors. And this view of communication as efficient information transmission has shaped entire fields of linguistics, most prominently Gricean pragmatics, where we view communication as this cooperative activity of giving each other helpful information and reasoning about the speaker who gives you helpful information to infer what she actually meant, because very often we understand a lot more than what is literally said. So in this inference process, we are driven by the assumption that the speaker was trying her best giving us the information. So if I was really excited about the outcome of a recent political elections, I could say, you know, the election outcome was amazing. But sometimes, even when speakers are really excited or really upset about an election outcome, instead of saying it was terrible, they say things like, the election outcome was interesting. From the point of view of efficient information transmission, this is not something that what you should do, because this gives your listeners a lot of freedom in interpreting what does interesting actually mean. So why do people do this? It appears that in the communication process there is something else than only efficient information transmission. And more specifically, there is a component of relationship management. There was once a very famous book I've learned from my colleagues in psychology, where we read every communication has a content and a relationship aspect such that the latter classifies the former and is therefore a meta-communication. So this relationship management appears to be as important in conversation as sending truthful information. And these two goals sometimes inflict opposing pressures on the speaker, because in order to send information, she needs to be straightforward, and in order to manage relationships, she needs to be careful with her word choices. So what I would like to look at today is experimental data showing that speakers choose indirect utterances strategically to manage relationships and to avoid conflicts of opinions. And this strategy, interestingly, is modulated by cultural practices. Then we will ask whether it's anything about a particular topic that makes you choose indirect utterances versus direct utterances. And we will also have a very brief glimpse into personal characteristics. So in the first experiment, our participants read short vignettes like this. So we showed them, first asked them what's their opinion about some controversial topic, like climate policies in your country or in your city, and you were allowed to pick from 1 heart, saying that you are very dissatisfied with the climate policies, to 5 hearts to mean that you are very satisfied. And then we showed them a simulated conversation partner, and that conversation partner either had a very negative or very positive opinion. We wanted to create maximal discrepancy with the opinion of the participant that we couldn't really know, because this was something that they entered, this data. So we try to create conversation partners that are either on the one end of the scale or on the other end of the scale. And then we said that, you know, you want to discuss this topic with this partner, and what would you say? And we offered them 5 possible options, from schrecklich to fantastisch in German, and we had an English version and a German version of this experiment. And these words were supposed to cover a range from very strongly negative opinions to very strongly positive opinions. I will first look at the English data, and we will compare the top panel, where there is a conflict of opinions between the opinion that you reported and the opinion that your partner had. And at the bottom, there is no conflict of opinions. So one thing we notice is that, so we plot the proportions of direct utterances, indirect utterances, and utterances that are opposite to your true opinion. We classify utterances as direct if they exactly match how many hearts you marked them to be. So if you marked it 5 hearts and you said it's amazing, then it's a direct utterance. It's also a direct utterance if you gave it 3 hearts and you said it's interesting. And we did a separate norming study where we matched these words to the numbers of hearts. However, if your true opinion is 1 heart and you said it was interesting, or 5 hearts and you still said it was interesting, then we counted those cases as indirect, right? Because it doesn't match exactly your opinion. And the relevant change is here in the proportions of indirect utterances between the case when there is no conflict and when there is a conflict. So for English speakers, the presence of the conflict induces a higher proportion of indirect utterances. So they now use even more indirect utterances than direct utterances in the case when there is a conflict, when their partner has a different opinion, and they don't do this when there is no conflict of opinions. And we then did an evaluation like this with a German group, and we were really puzzled because the results were very different. So in this case, there is a clear preference for direct utterances independent of whether there is a conflict of opinions or there is no conflict of opinions. And in the case when there is no conflict of opinions, it appears to even become bigger, this difference. So German speakers prefer direct utterances, even if they anticipate that there is a discrepancy in the opinions between them and their conversation partners. And we thought, well, maybe this is a problem of diskutieren. Maybe if you are ready to discuss something with somebody, then they should be able to embrace whatever you tell them, even if you disagree. And we tried another version of this experiment now with Sprechen, and the results were similar. A little bit higher, I would say, the proportion of indirect utterances overall, but still this pattern generally was very similar across them. And statistically, we compared both German groups to the English group, taking it as a baseline, and the proportion of indirect utterances was different from the German group compared to the English group. And there was an interaction between the participant group and the presence of the conflict, and we can also see it in the plot. For the English speakers, the presence of conflict had a strong effect on the proportion of indirect utterances, and for the German speakers it also did, but in the different direction, right? So they started using more direct utterances suddenly, particularly in the middle group. So when we looked at these experiments, we thought, well, maybe the problem is that we gave German speakers topics that they don't care about. You know, there were topics like, how do you feel about public transport in your city? And, you know, if you're not happy with the public transport in your city, so what? It's not a very sensitive topic. So we tried to find controversial topics and offer German speakers topics that they would find controversial. And maybe you would avoid such topics at your Christmas dinner with your family. So we asked people about things like abortion. So German speakers may have a very strong opinion about whether women are allowed to have a right to abortion, or they shouldn't have a right to abortion. So we asked them again to rate their opinion on a Likert scale using the hearts, and then we showed them again a simulated partner who had either a very negative or a very positive opinion, and we asked them again to choose the utterances. And I will first show you the overall results. On the left, this is a case when participants had the same opinion, so when the opinion of the participant of our experiment and the simulated partner matched, and when they had different opinions. So one thing we replicate from experiment 1, the blue bars are still higher than the green bars. So it means that there is overall a preference for direct utterances compared to indirect utterances, unlike in our English group. So there appears to be a cultural tendency to be explicit, and particularly in topics that are controversial, you need, maybe it's more polite actually to be honest about what you think, right, and not hide it from other people. But it's also true that German speakers are sensitive to the presence of conflict or the absence of conflict, because there is a difference in the proportion of indirect utterances in the cases when the opinion is the same versus the cases when the opinion is different. Okay? So it's not double as many indirect utterances when there is a conflict, but it's substantially more, and this difference is statistically significant. So on the one hand, it's true that there is this cultural baseline that is different between the English and the German speakers, but German speakers are sensitive to the social utility, so to the relationship management part, just to a different extent. And then since we manipulated topic controversy, or rather we normed topic controversy, we also should be able to take a look a little bit into this data and find out whether participants tend to use indirect utterances more when a topic was controversial. This was at least the hypothesis that we started with, because we reasoned that if a topic is controversial, then participants should be more indirect, and so should try to avoid the controversy and should try to avoid creating the conflict. And to norm the topics, in a separate experiment, we offered participants statements on a range of topics that we thought might be controversial for them. And we based our initial set of topics on sociology literature, also asking ChatGPT for its valuable opinion. And so participants rated things like, I don't know, should we prohibit right extremism parties from even being admitted to the election or not, and other kinds of measures. So people reported whether they find topics controversial or not controversial. And this was the ranking that we obtained. So on the top of the list, for example, is immigration. So the immigration policies of the government, how controversial is this topic, support of Israel, obligatory immunizations are on the top of the list, and on the bottom of the list are the public transport one that I mentioned in the beginning. So maybe that's also part of the reason why in the first experiment we didn't see so much of an effect. Maybe they just didn't care about the public transport really. And then we again asked, so we then split the experiment in two, and participants then, so in the more controversial and less controversial topics, and obtained the measures. So there could be situations where there is no conflict of opinions, or situations when there is a conflict of opinions between the conversation partners going in either direction, that you have a very negative opinion and the other person is very positive, or the reverse. Right. So in this plot, you will see a subset of the data when there is no conflict of opinions between you and your conversation partner, and you see the line is boringly flat. It means that the controversy score is in no way correlated with the indirectness score. So there is some stable proportion of indirect utterances. It's not very high, and you really don't care about what kind of a topic it is. Is it a very controversial topic like immigration, or is it absolutely not controversial topic like, by the way, Datenschutz turned out to be a non-controversial topic according to our norming, but there was nothing. However, if you look at the case for conflict of opinions, so when your partner has a different opinion than what you do, there is a very strong, convincing correlation. The only issue is that it goes in an entirely different direction that we expected it to go. Right? So the more controversial a topic is, the less indirect speakers become. And this also resonates with the results that I reported from the first experiment, where German speakers in the Diskutieren version of the experiment, they kind of amplified this difference between direct and indirect utterances in the presence of conflict, only that they started using more indirect utterances. And this data that we are looking at right now seems to align with exactly this effect. So, and this was something that we entirely didn't expect, because we thought of, what defines the social utility, and we thought what defines the social utility is the avoidance of conflict of beliefs, and apparently it's much more complicated than that in some cultures. And we also had a very, very brief look at the personality characteristics, and this is very fresh data. It's the first time that I'm showing it, so we'll have to think more about the interpretation. But in that plot, you see on the x-axis conscientiousness score, and on the y-axis the indirectness ratings. So it appears that conscientiousness has a positive, although a weak, but a positive correlation. So the more conscientious you are, the more indirect utterances you use. So we used what's called a Big Five personality assessment for obtaining these scores. And neuroticism, or what I think is called also negative emotionality, is also positively correlated with indirectness. So I don't know, negative emotionality, kind of expecting negative events or negative reactions. Maybe it also in some way correlates with indirectness, but this is something that we will discuss with the psychiatry part of our team, and I'm not ready to provide interpretation of that yet. Right. So in sum, I think I've demonstrated that both German and English speakers are sensitive to the presence of conflict of opinions, but they show different baselines of direct and indirect responses. And topic controversy matters when there is a conflict of opinions for the German group, so we don't have the data for the English group yet, but it goes in an entirely different direction that we expected. It looks like German speakers prefer to express their opinion directly, straightforwardly for controversial topics, and interestingly, this is something that I haven't addressed. So there was a category of utterances called opposite. So when your opinion is very negative and your partner's opinion, is also very negative, and I say, oh, the election results were amazing, the cases that we label as irony. And German speakers have a greater tendency, at least in our sample, to use ironic utterances. So, but we would need to collect the comparable English sample in order to make some more definitive conclusions. So, thinking a little bit more on the theoretical side, I think the existing models of indirect communication that we have right now within Rational Speech Act framework do not account for these differences, so they are not, there is nothing in the machinery yet that can predict that the social utility can be constructed so differently for speakers depending on their cultural group. And different expectations about conflict avoidance have downstream effects for the use of indirect utterances. So the situation appears to be more complex than we anticipated. And this project has also shown to us that doing work in psycholinguistics requires interdisciplinary expertise. We have several times in this project regretted not having enough of sociology background in order to find those topics that are really controversial, or now we luckily have psychiatrists in our team so that we can think about personal characteristics and how they affect verbal behavior. But I think this is kind of a direction in which I see this work going, integrating all this expertise. Thank you for your attention.